Okay, guys, so a short introduction about myself, and then we're going to talk a little bit about, the Pini asked me to speak about, retention marketing and the importance of it, but I thought it's, you guys already know that because you're here, and I kind of figured that lots of people are going to be talking about it anyhow, which luckily is true because I just heard Pini, and he's definitely more knowledgeable about it than me. And so what I want to give you is basically a few tips about building companies. And what I've been doing over the years is that, that's me. I'm a father of 3 kids, married to a girl called Daffy, who's amazing. I'm an Air Force pilot, and then I did a variety of things, founded a variety of companies, managed a few other companies, sold a few, and then the last kind of 10 years, in parallel to having a job, I started investing in companies. And the last sort of 4.5 years, I've been doing only that. So I've been investing in some of Israel's top companies, a company like MyHeritage and SimilarWeb and Plarium and Kenshu and Replay Technologies and some not in Israel, like SpaceApe and Evolution and many more. And I've done an MBA. And basically the thing that excited me over the years, the one thing that basically made me really excited is this bizarre understanding that there's a huge difference between companies at different stages. And so it constantly, because I was an entrepreneur in a small company, and then I ran medium-sized companies, and then I worked in a huge company and ran a relatively big company, and then went back to entrepreneurship and investments, it occurred to me that it's very strange that startups can do things that big companies can't. And I know it sounds strange, but the reality is that it's true. Startups do things differently. And so I started many years ago looking into what's the problem. And why is it that big companies cannot innovate? How can it be that these huge companies are basically left behind again and again? And that led me to a bigger understanding of what's really working in the startup ecosystem, which led me to a few things that I'm going to talk to you about today. The last thing that's not written here is that I am a founding partner of something called NFX, which is this thing, which is an accelerator in the Valley dealing only with network effect companies, so networks and marketplaces. And so a lot of the learnings I'm going to talk about also come from that. And here's some context, and this is why this is such a bizarre world. And that's a quote by a poet from the 19th century. And he said, the trouble with our times is that the future is not what it used to be. And when you look at many of the big companies, and when you look at many of the people trying to solve problems out there, they're basically dealing with the problems of yesterday. And the problems of yesterday are not the problems of tomorrow, and that's why it's so difficult for big companies. And when you look at, do big companies have a chance at all, it's a tough question. And you can see Jeff Bezos interviewed in 60 Minutes saying, being asked, who do you think is going to be the biggest retailer 50 years from now? And he says, I don't know, but I know that probably 20 years from now, it's not going to be Amazon. And everybody's kind of shocked, and they say, why do you say this? He says, because we're big, because we're already turning slow, and there's somebody else out there that's going to do it much bigger, much better than us. And so times are changing, things are moving very fast, and each one of you in your business need to think, what are the things that you can do to either, if you're a small company, take advantage of this and run really, really fast, or if you're a big company, understand what are the things that slow you down as a big company and try to solve them so that the people running after you don't run so much faster than you. And so this is part of a course, a bigger lecture, and so on. But I'm going to give you just a few of these that I hope are going to be useful and are going to be interesting. So the first one is that you have got to be agile and move really, really, really fast. And the word speed is, there's a guy in the Valley called Mike Cassidy. Mike sold already a few companies to Google, to others, overall more than $1 billion. And he's today in charge of this Project Loon, which is the Google balloons that are going to cover the world with internet. And Mike is the most phenomenal guy, and he's got this amazing lecture, which is called It's All About Speed. Now, the funny thing is that the lecture is always like, they always give him like an hour and a half, and he finishes it in half an hour to prove that you can do more in speed. But the reality is that his entire thesis is that you really need to move fast. And I try to deep dive a bit more into this. And there's something that I call the accelerated world. And this accelerated world is basically the world that we live in today, which is moving so much fast than ever before. And the fact that it's moving so much faster than ever before has huge impact on companies and on people. So let's start by understanding for a second, why is it accelerated? So in general, the pace of change is accelerating in the world. So if you take any 10 years in the lives of our grandparents, in the life of our parents, in our lives, in the lives of our kids, the pace of technological change is going to be dramatically accelerated. And true, there were points in the history of mankind where suddenly electricity was, people learned how to use electricity, and that was a huge change. But still, in terms of the everyday impact of technology on our lives, it's just accelerating and accelerating. I mean, just so you remember, when I was, that's going to tell you how old I was, but my first phone was when I was 25. I can't see my life without that. And as this is happening, things are moving faster. And what's happening in the world is that because of the internet, there's more information. And information is the biggest drive of change. And it's the biggest drive of speed, because more information means that there's a lot more choice. So all of us have a lot more choice because we have a lot more information available to us. And as there's a lot more choice, there's also changes all the businesses in the world because there's no longer brokerage. I have a friend that many years ago used to sell things to obscure African governments. He used to, let's say, buy a few of these somewhere in the world for $1, and he'll go to, I don't know, Nigeria, and he would sit in front of government officials and say, these cost $157 each. And he probably also paid somebody on the way, and he made a lot of money. And he tells the story that a few years ago, he came with one of these products that he was sourcing in China, and he came to the head of procurement of the government, and he sat with them, and he said, I want 157 per unit or something. And the guy turned the screen to him, showed him the website of the manufacturer on the screen, and said, hey, I just spoke to them. I found them. I spoke to them yesterday. They're willing to sell it for me for $50. I know you're paying more. Do you want to buy from me? And so this world of brokerage is changing. The biggest example, the one I love most, is the music industry. Think about ourselves as kids. Well, me as a kid at least. And, for somebody, let's say a singer in Canada, for me to listen to that, what would happen? The guy had to have an agent in Canada that would have gone to a local label in Canada, that after selling in Canada would go to the global label in the United States, that would think it's suitable for Europe and would send it to the label in Europe, that would think maybe it's good for Israel, would send it for Israel, and then a CD would be printed, it went to a distributor, went to the shop, and I'll go to the shop, and the guy at the store would give me a new disc to listen to. Today, the guy can actually do all of that flow in around 25 minutes by loading it to Spotify, or 1 hour if it's on iTunes. And other than all the lawyers that lost their job on the way, because each one of these transactions had lots of lawyers in it, the meaning is that at the end of the day, there's no brokerage. And so everything moves much faster, and the margins are kept in different places. We'll talk about it in a second. And then the impact of this information is that there's a lot less loyalty. And it's true across the board. And it's loyalty of consumers, it's loyalty of businesses, it's loyalty of employees. We look now at, if we take the most extreme place in the world, which is India, the average tenure of an employee in India right now is a year. How can you invest in growing employees when you know that in average, every employee, after a year, you need to replace almost all of your workforce? If we look at consumers, when many years ago I worked in Amdocs, we used to do this analysis of how many bad experiences do people need before they're moving to another provider. When we did it the first time in 2004, it was 3 bad experiences. But bizarrely enough, in 2005, it said 2 experiences, and we thought it's a mistake. But then the last I've seen that was in 2007, the answer was 1 bad experience. And that makes lots of sense because, I'm getting this bad experience. I'm immediately online. I'm looking at saying, I don't need that. I can actually get a better price elsewhere. I'm not going to stand for that. And so customer loyalty is also much lower, making it much tougher for businesses to maintain their competitive edge. And then, of course, it's a flatter world, which means that, you can get your car service in the United States, in Arkansas, by somebody that sits in Pune in India and was trained to speak with the right accent. And that makes life a lot tougher for companies because there's competition from all across. And everything that has to do with data, with information, is actually becoming much more extreme. This is driven by the internet, by smartphones, which are all around. There's more smartphones than PCs. Smartphones are growing much faster than PCs. And if you look at what's happening in the world, is that probably in a few years from today, people are talking about 2019, more than 90% of the population of the world is going to have a smartphone one way or another, which is amazing, including places, by the way, where there's no electricity. So people drive places, they charge their phone, they come back and they use their phone. This is what we're seeing across Africa, across Southeast Asia. And so this is a real revolution, because the meaning is that computing power that was just a part of people like us in the Western world is no longer that, and it's happening all around the world, and that's changing actually mankind. And there's another conversation about what that means. So things move really, really, really fast. And so how do we prove that? How do we prove that they're really moving fast? And if there's one slide that I want you to remember from this, is the next slide. That's one of my favorite slides of all time. And this is a slide about, it's called a retail consumption graph. And what we have here, this is the number of units sold up to 100 million, which is more or less full market penetration. And then the time it takes to get there. And as you can see here, the first one is cars. And cars took roughly 100 years to reach 100 million units. And then, okay, that's not what it was supposed to do. And then we go into radio, and radio took 70 years. And then we go into television, and that took 40 years. And then we go into the internet, and that took 10 years. And then we go into a small product called the iPod. Remember that? Which was already obsolete almost. And that took less than 4 years. And so we look at it and we say, what's the meaning of this? And clearly, cars are not iPods, and still, the meaning is that the entire concept of how you run a business has changed dramatically. And the importance of speed has changed dramatically. Because when you look at it, and let's take a story of a small company called General Motors, and they, at the beginning of the 20th century, they're building cars. And as they're building they're building trains. They're building engines and wheels for trains. And as they look at this new guy, Henry Ford, coming out with this new horseless carriage, they look at it and they say, should we go into that? We know this thing. It's easy for us. And so they sit down at their board and, with their big hats and beards and say, you know what, let's wait another year. Let's see how that goes. And then they wait another year and another, and they actually wait something like 20 years. And after 20 years, what they lose is roughly 5% of the market because things move slow. But then if we take a small company called Sony, and again, back then, Sony controls 72% of the mobile music players industry. Okay, something called the Discman and the Walkman. And Sony are slow on getting into digital music players. And the reason they're slow, by the way, I went and spoke to the people that were in charge of this project. The reason they're slow is because the CEO of Sony gets interviewed on the Wall Street Journal and says, who would want, when the Rio comes out, there was the first one, was called the Rio Zune, or if you remember. And it comes out, and only the old people do that. That's funny. and then the CEO gets interviewed and says, you know what? Who's ever going to want this thing? Because you need to put the disc into your computer to digitize the music, and then you can only put 4 songs because that's what it had. And every time you want a new song, you need to go back to the computer and change it. Nobody's going to ever want that. And so politically, it's a nightmare to continue working on a project when your CEO says that. And what happens is that they delay the project. And when they come out after 3 years or 2.5 years, they lose 80% of the market. And you know what's their market share today? Less than 1%. And so overall, being slow in this world has become very risky. And it's only going to get worse because if we set the internet 10 and iPods, whatever, 4 or 5, then Facebook took something like 3.5, and a small game called Farmville took 9 months. And Cityville, that was a game that was built on top of it, on the same infrastructure and the same user base, took 3 months. Probably the fastest thing growing in human history in terms of virality. And so being slow has become really, really, really bad. And companies, if you look at what's happening in the top public companies, at the beginning of the 20th century, nobody moved out of that list. If you look at the top 50 companies, the top list was fixed for years and years and years. If you look at what happened in the last 20 years, the list has changed almost completely. Companies do not have any competitive edge today because it's about moving fast. And when you move slow in this world, it's becoming very painful. Think about the film companies and digital photography world. There was a company called Kodak. I grew up in it. It was a household name. I could never think that Kodak's going to go away. What killed them? Digital photography. But what's the funniest thing? Who owns the patent for digital photography? Kodak. Okay, so they owned it. They own everything. They understand it. But in their mind, everything's going to stay the same. They invest billions in retrofitting, printing systems that used to print off film to print off digital, and they think that people are going to print the same quantity of images. Actually, in what they present to investors, they say people are going to print a lot more because they can shoot a lot more images, so they'll print a lot more. They don't understand digital at all, and so they go out of business. Studios, labels, distributors in the internet era. You know, I keep laughing. The guy that runs Universal, somebody I know well, you know, they missed the first run by giving iTunes on one hand and Amazon on the other hand, basically all the rights to sell all of their music, and so they're marginalized and they're almost going out of business. And so they said it's never going to happen again. When something new comes, we're going to get on top of it. And so what's something new? It's music streaming instead of download. And so music streaming starts, and guess what? Spotify, Pandora, RDIO, Beats are taking their business again. And again, you know, they're slightly negotiating better. But instead of understanding that that's the new world and moving fast, just impossible. MySpace, Microsoft, Google in social networks, you know, some of the biggest companies out there, Microsoft. Microsoft owned 500 million people on Hotmail. They owned 450 million people on Messenger. They even had something called Passport, which is essentially Facebook Connect. The best they could do on social networks was to invest in Facebook at a $15 billion valuation. Nokia and RIM, you know, these are companies that I thought are going to stay forever. I come from the telecom industry. If somebody told me 8 years ago that Nokia and RIM are going to be basically going out of business, I would have laughed. I would have said, you're completely out of your mind. Nokia is all about consumer. RIM is all around business. They dominate. And the day the iPhone was launched, I was having lunch with the CEO of Vodafone. And I asked him, what do you think about the iPhone? And you know what? It's a funny thing, because he said, I think it's going to fail. And I said, why do you think it's going to fail? And he said something that I still remember till today because it's so enlightening. He said, because it's a shitty phone. And I said, what do you mean? He said, it's a shitty phone. The battery runs out fast. It's difficult to dial on it. The quality of voice is not good. It's a shitty phone. And you know what? He was right. It was a shitty phone. Still is a shitty phone, but it's not a phone. He had a complete blind spot to the fact that this is a new thing. This is a computer that you carry with you. And so he was right on the phone, but he was asking the wrong question. And so being slow is very painful. On the other hand, being fast gets you some very, very nice result these days. Facebook, what is it, $200 billion of valuation, company less than 10 years old. Airbnb, that's now 15 or 20, a company of 3.5 years old. Uber, 50, company that's only 3.5 years old, and so on. So when you move fast in this industry, right now, you can get very far, very fast. And all of these companies, if you look at the one thing that is very, very, very characteristic to them, is the speed in which they move, the speed in which they iterate, and the people they get. So the second point after moving fast, and one of the key things to be able to move fast, is the people. And you know, everybody says that people are the greatest assets. Clearly, I said that as well, but not everybody really acts on it. And finding the best people, getting them into the company and retaining them is extremely difficult. So a few tips. Look for your stars. When I say look for the stars, it's the people that have fire in their eyes. They love what they do. They're really good at it. They get the job done. They act on their commitment. You never need to remind them that they need to do something. You know, they do more than what they're supposed to do. They care. Caring is a big word. They care. They care about the job. They care about the company. They care about their employees. They care about themselves. And they love that data, because at the end of the day, moving fast in this world requires data. We're going to talk about that in a second. You've got to hire for attitude and train for skill. This is one of the biggest mistakes of companies out there. You know, we sit there, we look at the CVs. Yeah, this guy has only 3 years experience. We wanted 4.5. Bang, gone. Remember that at the end of the day, the dry list of attributes of a person means nothing about the person's ability to succeed in your company. And getting the person with their own culture is going to slow you down dramatically more than if he's coding a bit better. And so make sure that you hire for attitude and train for skill. And then always hire up. You know, I keep getting people telling me, you know, I've met this great guy. He's amazing. He can really be amazing. But you know what? He ran 20 people before. He's only going to run 2 people here. You know what? He's overqualified. I hate this word. There's no such thing as overqualified. Now, of course, don't take it to the extreme, but there's no such thing. Always think what's going to happen in a few months. Because you want to grow fast. And if you grow fast, you need to actually have people that can grow with you. You need to get people that will actually move with you along the way. You need to build a team rather than just a group of people. Many times I see like a group of cookie cutters, same personality, 4, 8 to 100. It's a unit in Israel that many tech people come out of. 4 people, exactly the same. You look at it and say, where's the team here? It's just a bunch of the same people. Nobody's different. Nobody's going to be contributing more than the other. And so build a team. Make sure that they don't all sit on the same box. Don't be afraid to recruit unique and different people. Some of the best people that ever worked for me were people from totally different directions that came in. And remember that A people recruit A people. If you get B people, they recruit C and Ds. If you get A people, they recruit other A people. So people. And then retaining them is not as easy even as bringing them in. Because these people, they want to feel that they came to the right place. And so you need to care about them. You need to empower them. You need to give them positive feedback because everybody needs that. And also on top of it, you need to give them great compensation if they do well. Don't let them burn out because they're the first one. As we said, they do more. So, you let them do more and more and more and more. Eventually, they run out of energy and you're left without your best people. Ensure that everybody knows the strategy. I mean, this sounds stupid, but it comes from an experiment many years ago. And we're talking about the Industrial Revolution, people standing at the production line and doing that. And then they do an experiment. They take half of them and show them how the little knob that they're making sits in the final machine. And the other half just continue doing that. The production of those that know where the knob sits goes up by close to 100% and stays up. Because it's impossible to do that, or any job, without knowing how you're part of the big picture, without knowing how you contribute. Take decisions when required, because these great people, when they come to you for a decision, they actually want you to make a decision. They don't want you to just say, which I used to do as a stupid young executive, I used to say, I did not bring all these great people just that I can make decisions. You're grown up, you can do that. Which of course is stupid. By the time they come to you, they really want you to make a decision. And celebrate success, because everybody wants to be part of something successful. So we said, move fast, have the great people, ensure you have the right culture. And the bad news about that is that building a culture is a damn tough thing. The good thing is that it's a lot shorter now than it used to be in the past. You can change a company's culture much quicker. And these are just, we don't have a lot of time, but these are the things that I've found are critical in a culture. It's thought innovation, it's open-mindedness, it's a culture of listening, of caring. It's a culture of admitting and accepting mistakes, because innovation, and this is something you've got to remember, innovation fails 9 out of 10 times. Again, innovation fails 9 out of 10 times. Because this is the case. This is why, by the way, big companies do not innovate, because how can you really innovate when the best way to get promoted in a big company is never to fail, right? And so if you don't change that, you're not going to have your people innovating. And in your companies, you want people to innovate. So they've got to really be convinced, really, really be convinced that failing is okay. Good failures, Larry Page says that there's good failures and bad failures. The bad ones are those that are because people were not professional. The good ones are because they went all the way in and they did it perfectly well, but eventually the product is not what people wanted and they couldn't have known it before. This is a good failure. So make sure that you accept and embrace good failures. Almost celebrate them like successes. Culture of being fast. A culture of living the numbers, because a company cannot succeed today without really, really knowing what's the data and what's in the data. And care about the people, the rest will come, the rest will follow. Lesson number 4, you've got to choose your battle wisely and take tough decisions. And this is really one of the toughest things for startups, because it's so easy to get distracted and do the wrong things. And we're just going to run through it. As a startup, the toughest thing is not to decide what to do. It's to decide what not to do. And this is true also for big companies. You've really got to choose your battles. You can't do everything. You've got to make sure that you do less, but what you do has got to be really, really good. You've got to make sure that you decide what you're focused on now, go for it, and find out quickly if it works or not. And this is the entire concept of the fast iteration, fast failure. This is something that you've got to keep in your mind. You've got to make sure that you know what everybody's doing now. You've got to make sure that this is the best thing to focus on right now. And then when you finish being sure, just iterate it quickly, find out whether it's working or not. And if not, go back to your assumption and start again. That's a whole course about how to build a startup, but we don't have the time for that. And don't engage in multiple battles at the same time. And this is really critical because as a startup, you don't have the energy for that. You don't have the manpower. Even in a big company, it's difficult. But more than that, when you engage in many battles at the same time, it's very difficult to understand what's working and what's not working. If you're changing so many things across the board, then understanding what really is working and what not is very difficult. Take tough decisions. And tough decisions in knowing when an iteration has failed. On the other hand, knowing when to push hard. So this is really, and this is where data comes in handy, because the way to know whether something's working or not is through the data. Don't delay decisions. You know, there's one thing that we do all the time as people. We really fall in love with what we do. And it's really difficult for us to accept that it's not working. And so we fool ourselves. You know, I sat this morning with a company and, you know, they're telling that, you know, their KPIs are improving another 1%, another 2%. And you could say, you know, if you're going to improve another 1% every couple of months for the coming 2 years, you're not going to get anywhere. The market's moving. You know, take bold, big decisions. Try to move the needle. Try to make sure that you're getting there. There's something in the Valley that I love, and this is the statement that says, if you're not sure that you're the winner, then you're not the winner. Okay, each one of you that sits here probably is part of a successful company. You can imagine for a second the point when you figure it out that what you're doing is working. And this is the feeling, this is the sensation. My partner in NFX calls it being pulled by the nose. He says, you know, you're trying and trying and trying and you're pushing, but then when it works, you feel that you're being pulled by the nose. So when you're not being pulled by the nose, know that it's not the right thing, iterate and move on, and move on. And there's this entire philosophy of how you do that. And, you know, first thing you change is the messaging, then you change the product, and then the core assumption. But we don't have time for this. But go for big changes. Go for the ones that are going to make a difference, because this is what's going to get you successful. And then the last lesson we're going to talk about today is being data-driven, which is really critical. Because everything I spoke about today can only be driven by data. You cannot know when an iteration is not working without data. You cannot know when a change is not the right thing without data. You cannot know whether you're on track without data. You cannot even measure people without data. So you've got to be very data-driven. And that means that you've got to basically build your infrastructure really quickly. Big company, small company, same thing. And luckily today you can use off-the-shelf systems that do it much better than ever before. Systems such as Optimove do things that in the past used to cost tens of millions of dollars and huge teams to do that automated today. So use off-the-shelf systems. Make sure that you choose your KPIs. Everybody sitting in this room should know what are the 3-4 top KPIs that are the most important for your business. If you don't know what they are, when you wake up in the middle of the night, you've got a problem. You've got to nail down, because there's hundreds of KPIs, but there are 3 or 4 that are the ones that are really, really, really key to your business. And they change over time. So you've got to know what they are at every given point, and then you've got to monitor them vigorously and understand what's driving them. You've got to keep ensuring that they're the right ones, because as I said, they're changing. And then you've got to have people that are data-driven, as we said before. You've got to hire dedicated people to deal with data and deal with the systems early on, because that's so critical. But you've got to ensure that it's not only these people that deal with data. There's not a single person in a startup or a tech company that does not need data in their work. And the agility, the speed, the enablement that data gives you is something that's critical for the success of every company. So make sure that data is part of everybody's job. Make sure that one glimpse at your dashboard tells you exactly where your business is, because that's where you want to be. And on the other hand, of course, as I said, it's about understanding the core things and diving down where necessary. Don't let yourself fall into what's called analysis paralysis, which is basically overanalyzing and not doing. Last thing, use data across your business. So what most people know to use data for is A/B tests, or use it for conversion testing, but that's not enough. Data should be used across the entire business. And the one place which, you know, luckily you're sitting in the right place to understand that, but the one place where most people miss this is retention. And if there's one thing I can tell you from a variety of companies that I've worked with, is that retention marketing done right is equal doubling your business. It's not 10%, it's not 15%, it's doubling your business. And this is really the critical thing. And the good news is, while most people miss out, the first good news is that you're sitting here, so you know that. But the second good news is that if in 888, in my 888 times, we had to build a system like this on our own, which included taking an off-the-shelf campaign management, but customizing it to death, and building a dedicated the data warehouse for that, and having, you know, build a campaign builders on it that we've built. And it cost us something like $5 million in 2 years to complete this project. And then we needed a team of tens of people to run that. The beauty of it is that today you can do this with off-the-shelf technology in 0 time, getting the benefits very quickly, and doing it with not as many people, which is great. And so you've got to be able to do that. And I can tell you one more thing. The positive impact is not just on your numbers. The positive impact is on the entire culture of the business. So if you start thinking, and this is one of the, you talk to the big VCs in the Valley, this is now the age of moving from the conversion data to the retention data. So, VCs in the Valley used to ask only about growth. What's your growth, what's your growth? But suddenly they realized that it's a leaky bucket. And so if you're just looking at the growth, but you don't make sure the retention is working, it just doesn't work. So today, everything you hear in the Valley is, what's your retention, what's your retention, what's your retention? And that's got to be the thing. That's got to be across the company. Bringing customers that go away means nothing. Bringing customers that stay is everything. And so retention marketing, that's part of the future, and that's something that you really got to go into. So, summary. You've got to be glad because these are amazing times to be in tech. Probably the best and most exciting times ever. You've got to stay open-minded and accept the accelerated world. This accelerated world is tough. It's tough because it moves stuff. And some of you are from big companies, and that's going to mean that it's challenging for you. It's easier for those from the small companies that can take advantages, but you've got to stay open-minded. You can't push it back. This is the world, and you've got to move with it. You've got to ask the right questions. As we said before, the guy from Vodafone, he completely missed out on asking the right question. Similarly, another story I love is about the guy that ran Daimler, the car company, somewhere in the 50s, I think, in the 30s. They took a consultancy to ask, what's the total potential number of cars in the world? And at the time, the consultancy came back, a project that cost a few millions, and the answer was 1 million cars global potential, which is clearly ridiculous. And so, I know time's up. Which is clearly ridiculous, but that's not interesting. The interesting thing is, why did they get it wrong? And the reason why they got it wrong, when you read this research, which is amazing, is because they said, we cannot see a world where there's more than 1 million professional drivers, and therefore there cannot be more than 1 million cars. Why? Because they thought about the carriage. No gentleman or lady would ever drive their own carriage. It's dirty, it's not. And so if it's only going to be drivers, it's limited by the number of drivers. So again, asking the right questions and understanding that it's the accelerated world is critical. Ensure you've got the right people, data, methodology. Be data-driven and enjoy these great times in the tech world. Thank you.